So today we're going to talk about positive behavior supports and classroom management. So classroom management, you have to establish clear and consistent expectations. So your expectations have to be set for conversation and movement. And this is particularly true for small group, whole group, and independent work expectations. You also have to set very clear expectations for conflict resolution both in and outside of the classroom. You're going to have to set your own classroom rules. So when you set your classroom rules, you need to allow student buy-in. If your students have say in the rules for the classroom, they're much more likely to abide by those rules. So as you set your classroom rules, set as few rules as possible. If you have a list of 60 rules, the students will not adhere to them. If you're a Harry Potter fan, then you remember Dolores Umbridge and her wall of rules and dictates. And that's very true of your classroom as well. You don't want your entire room to be so micromanaged that your students are not allowed to thrive and to ask questions. Rules must be consistent with school expectations. If students are allowed to have a level 4 voice when they are out at recess, you cannot tell them that they can only have a level 2 voice at recess. So your expectations must be consistent with your school expectations. Determine the consistent and reasonable consequences for infractions. So if your classroom rules say that you have to have your shoes tied at all times, a consistent and reasonable consequence for this infraction is not to have a child be suspended for a week for not having their shoes tied. So let's select rules that are enforceable and reasonable. Let's go back to my previous example. Having your shoes tied constantly, is that a enforceable and reasonable rule? Well, probably not in a kindergarten classroom. We're going to have a lot of students who cannot tie their shoes yet. And probably not for a special education teacher when you're working with a student population who's going to have a deficit in being able to tie their shoes. There's a lot of disabilities that have either a gross motor deficit, a fine motor deficit, or just a cognitive deficit that's going to delay that skill. And then you're also going to modify your rules as needed, understanding that you're going to have to be fluid, that your rules, your class, your students are going to change throughout the year. Classroom management and student behavior. You need to look for positive student behavior and let students know that you recognize it. And for some students, it's just going to be walking into school. I'm so happy you're in school today. Good job for showing up. And for some students, it's going to be using a polite word, and the second they do it, you have to say congratulations. Every single student has positive behavior. Sometimes it's harder to find than others, but the second you do, you have to reinforce that behavior. So give immediate and positive feedback for students and their positive behaviors. And you're going to have to do that differently for students in different age groups. The way you show positive reinforcement for high schoolers and for preschoolers is going to be very different. You need to use reinforcers to encourage a positive behavior. And we need to remember as teachers that reinforcers do not have to cost money. A lot of times teachers say, I spend so much money on my treasure box and I just went to the dollar store again. You can use a lunch with a teacher. You can use the ability to write on the whiteboard. You can use all sorts of things that are free and that are huge reinforcers to a child. So make sure that you're thinking outside the box and you're thinking of ways that you don't have to spend a large amount of money to reinforce with students. So what can you do to change an inappropriate behavior? And what should you not do? So do not use threats. I'm going to call your mom. I'm going to take away your recess. I'm going to take away that book. I'm going to make you do this. Do not threaten a child. Do not have too many rules. Don't establish rules that punish you. If you do not have recess duty, don't make that child stay in a recess with you so you're taking away your free time. You will end up regretting that and resenting the child because you never have your planned time. Listen and talk to the student, but don't fight with the student. Because remember, you're the adult, they're the child. And when you start fighting with a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, you have to stop and take a step back and say, am I really fighting with a 10-year-old child? What's going on here? Use logic and principles and effective guidelines to make decisions. And then don't focus on minor problems. Okay, so a kid's tapping a pencil. The kid's not running out of the room screaming or throwing a chair. This is probably a good thing. I don't need to micromanage or nitpick a kid. And let's treat every student as an individual and problem solve with these kids. And then ask the parents and family for some help. What isn't working? What questions to ask? So are you providing too much or too little reinforcement? Are you following through? Is the entire team following through? And are you giving the reinforcers as promised or earned? So remember, these reinforcers are like the kid's paycheck. Are you going to work and do your hard work and not receive a paycheck? And the same thing is true of our kids. If our kids work hard to earn their goals and then they don't get their reinforcers, it's very discouraging for them. So we want to use positive reinforcement or positive things, token systems, and we can also use extensions. We can also use punishment or timeout, but once again, those are not going to be positive and they're not going to be our best option. So our communication, we have social difficulties. You have a communication problem, aggression, or hyperactivity. So if you have a communication difficulty, you want to build a relationship with a student. And then after building the relationship with the student, you want to work on those pragmatic skills. So eye contact, turn taking, initiative, interaction, sharing, and requesting and responding. And the only way to teach these students these skills is just like anything else you're going to teach. It's going to be practice. It's going to be repetition, and it's a skill that's taught. And this is just as important as any academic skill you're going to teach. Once again, a relationship with a student will make teaching these skills so much easier for both the teacher and the student. So aggression. I think most important with aggression is developing a relationship with the student. You're going to have to teach the appropriate and inappropriate behavior and understanding the cycle so you can provide preemptive techniques, stop the aggressive behavior, avoid the triggers, allow free communication with the student, and then create a safe and open environment for the students. So some of the successes I have seen, I've been working in special education for the last 5 years. And so these are successes that I have seen overall, not just in my classroom so far this semester. I work in a Title I school, and we are a trauma-sensitive school, and we use restorative justice. And since we have put these programs into place, our consistency, calm, routine, and safety have transformed our school. They are absolutely amazing. So not successful yet. We use a growth mindset in our school, so we don't have failures. We have things that we're not successful yet with. We're still working on them. We are making mistakes, but we're getting there. We have a very aggressive student. The student hurts staff members, damages private and school property, threatens self-harm. This student is a very challenging student. And the behavior specialists are stumped. The teachers are stumped. The staff is frustrated. We spend all of our time trying to make sure the student does not hurt other students. So it has become a very challenging situation. And so, yet we're still trying to find the key, the trigger that's going to help us with the student, but we're not there yet. So I would use Circle of Friends. And I say this because we use restorative justice, and ever since we started using restorative justice, I became a huge fan of Circle Time. And when I first found out we were going to use it, I was a huge skeptic. But then when I saw Circle Time in action and I saw what it could do for conflict resolution, I became a huge fan. What it can do for that peer-to-peer interaction and helping them understand social skills and the cause and effect of their actions and what they are doing and what they aren't doing is amazing. So I've seen something like Circle of Friends actually put into action on a daily basis, and I've seen it over the last year and a half, and it really has transformed some of the behaviors, and some of our students who were exhibiting negative behaviors out of social awkwardness, being socially awkward instead of out of malice. So the instructional environment. You have large group instruction. That's when the teacher provides support or instruction to a group of 6 or more students. This is appropriate when the goal is similar for all students or when instruction is helpful for all students to learn at the same time. It's also going to be useful for a teacher when modeling or promoting discussion, and students have less opportunity for feedback. Instructional environment or small group instruction. You have groups of 2 to 6 students. It's effective when students want to teach specific instruction when a teacher wants to teach specific instruction to target students. It allows for individual feedback, and groups are formed for either a similar or different ability levels, depending on how the teacher decides to break that up. And then teachers are able to individualize instruction. One-on-one instruction. A teacher works individually with a student. A teacher allows intensive instruction for a student. Close monitoring of student and clear data can be accomplished in this setting. And it must have other work for students to be fully engaged. So the biggest drawback on this is if you have a classroom that has 6 students at the time, and you're doing one-on-one, then those other 5 have to be fully engaged. Otherwise, you're losing instruction time and you're losing those IEP minutes for those other 5. So independent learning is going to allow students to practice skills they have already learned. And as a teacher, you have to make sure that a student already knows how to do that work. So they can read and comprehend the book. They understand how to do the math problem correctly. So not only do they get the answer right, but they know how to do it correctly. So if they're doing 2-digit addition without regrouping, are they going from left to right or right to left? Because if they are going from left to right, then you're allowing that student to constantly do something incorrectly, and you're going to have to fix it later on. But if they're going from right to left, then that's great, and you can allow them to practice that skill. So students must understand the expectations, as they understand when they can ask for help, when they don't ask for help, what their conversation level is, in order for this to be successful. And in cooperative learning, students need to work in small groups. They use each other's resources. And then the consequences, the grades, are based on a group performance. All materials are going to be received as a group. And then the students have complementary roles. So one person's going to be in charge of vocabulary, one person's going to be in charge of notes, one person's going to be the leader. And then they're often going to be seen like in a jigsaw format or in group format or a literary circle. And these are really great because they really force that social interaction, those interpersonal skills. And that's something that's going to be needed for a life skill, for a long-term functioning level. And then you have your peer teaching. One student knows a content and assists with the other. You need to make sure there's a lot of teacher supervision when you do this. And then both the student and the peer need to know when to ask the teacher for assistance. So when have I seen success? I've seen a lot of independent work with task boxes, independent work with play, peer teaching with inclusion, when you allow another student to take on a child who's in a functional room or a self-contained room and help them during inclusion time. And one-on-one with academic work works really well. So what isn't successful yet? When you are too dependent on one-on-one academic time and then staffing is light because of sickness, and then the teacher can't flex into a new method of teaching it. I've seen that happen a couple times with new teachers, and they don't understand or they don't know how to change when they don't have their parents show up. So instead of having that one-on-one attention, then they say, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? And the kid ends up on an iPad or a movie ends up turned on instead of being able to flow into that group work. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you found this informative, and I look forward to our next assignment. Thank you.